Welcome everybody to the election assessment hearing. My name is Seth Johnson. I'm an information quality improvement consultant, and I came into some association with Larry English basically by running into his analysis of a 2000 election, and I've worked with him to try to apply quality principles to the 2004 election since so much investigations and efforts to improve the process have cropped up in what, shall we say, is the distributed media. I'd like to just give you one introductory set of comments about the nature of quality improvement. Whenever you hear about horizontal management styles or fact-based performance management or management, that comes from quality. The quality revolution, Larry, I'm sure, could tell you exactly when it happened. But basically what quality does is it gives you, based on an understanding of the interdependency of processes, a way of having a factual basis to see how well you are doing and how well you're improving. And in the case of elections in America, because we've relied on another way of assuring the integrity of the process, we don't really have that baseline. We don't really see how accurate our vote is right now. We're seeing it bits and pieces in various places around the country. And one of the things that I would like to encourage with this hearing is that we work on establishing that factual basis. Whatever factual basis we can establish now allows us to see our actual improvement later, and we can actually move forward on that basis. And there's two kinds of bridging that you have to do in the case of information. Larry English is the foremost authority on applying quality principles to information, which is a very unique thing. Many people actually believe that's not particularly possible. What we've done in the case of, I'm sorry, it's not we, what Larry has done in the case of information quality improvement is found a way of bridging both the business side and the technical side. The people who actually develop systems, who are basically doing this on their own in the case of e-voting systems, and the people who actually run the process day to day in the election offices. And then the other bridging that you do with quality is between the people who own the process and the people who depend on it. And when you're talking about elections, that's basically everybody. Now, Larry English is the recipient of a Quality Progress Award in 2000. He was featured on the cover of their magazine in 2000. He writes a monthly column in the DM Review magazine. And there is, in my mind, no better voice to be brought in to provide us a means for assessing and analyzing election processes in America. So please welcome Larry English.
Thank you, Seth, and thank all of you who have put so much time and effort into the problems that we're looking at and proposed solutions. It is an honor and a privilege for me to be here with you, serving you, and helping to get your message to the people who do have the ability to make change in this process. I'd like to especially thank Kip and Seth, who have organized this with an impossible 5 weeks of prior notice and lead time to make this happen. And they've put countless hours in to make this happen. So let's give them thanks. This is indeed a most significant occasion. And I would like to thank each of those of you who have submitted your testimony, your analysis of the problems, your recommendations for improvement. You have spent tens of thousands of hours in studying the problems and collecting information and analyzing how we can overcome these broken processes. And so I would like to say thank you and give you our thanks for your hard work. Thank you, everybody. And then most significantly, I thank our panelists. And not all of our panelists are here today. Many had conflicts, and they will be joining us for the report writing. But we have a huge task to take your testimony and evidence and analyze that and put that in a form of findings and recommendations of what the potential causes are of the problems and the proposed solutions that can help overcome the problems. I believe that this is the first event of its type where we're looking at election reform from true quality management principles. And when Ed Deming and Joseph Joran, the American quality gurus, went to Japan and taught the Japanese their quality management principles, the Japanese listened, understood, and implemented those in their manufacturing processes. And what they did is they transformed the economy of the world by making quality a requirement and not a nicety in manufactured goods. We need those same processes here. And I would like to say to our panelists, we're going to be looking at this with open eyes, listening. We may be asking clarifying questions so that we can understand and do a good job for you to translate this. And I'd like to say thanks to our panelists. Okay. Let me have them introduce themselves to you just briefly so that you know who they are. Mary Beth, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Kusnick. I am a poll worker in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. I've held that position for 15 years, and as such, I've been very strongly advocating for everyone voting during that time. And I'm very honored to sit on this panel because I feel so strongly about the need for having a good process where all citizens can vote and can have their votes counted.
I'm Evelyn Roberson. Eve Roberson, actually, is what people call me. And I'm from Santa Rosa, California. And I'm a retired election supervisor of 15 years. And I am an election activist. I want to be sure that every vote is counted and that it's counted accurately. And that's what I've been working on for the last several years.
My name is Seth Johnson, and I have a private practice in information quality improvement consultancy. That's about all I really want to say.
Good morning. My name is Tom Oswald. I'm a civil and commercial mediator from Boston. I'm very privileged to be here, Larry. Thanks for inviting me. I'm very concerned about maintaining and improving the credibility of the vote. Voter enfranchisement and disenfranchisement has been an issue of mine personally for many years. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Let me just introduce the rest of the our day today. This event today is not a conference. This is not a rally. This is not a protest. But we are here for a hearing to hear the facts, to hear the evidence, analyze that, and to translate that into something that can create true election reform. I want to welcome you and thank you for your participation in this event. And as such, as we are a hearing, and because our speakers have limited time, I'd like for us to, during the testimony part of this and questioning, refrain from applause, refrain from any kind of audible noise. Please turn off your cell phones and beepers or turn them to vibrate. Please refrain from any type of reaction that can be picked up. We are recording this event. When we break, please honor the time request so that we can move forward expeditiously. Return prior to the time that the break time will be over so that we can maximize our time. This hearing is going to explore any and all kinds of problems with our election processes. We are going to address the problems that can cause disenfranchisement of anyone from their right to vote, regardless of where that process is. From registration, from ballot access, all the way through to vote counting, vote recounting, and auditing. Now, as such, there are no sacred cows. There are no processes that are being excluded from our examination of problems. We must look at all of the things that can cause our processes to fail. Kaoru Ishikawa, the great Japanese quality guru, always used to say, speak with data. If we're going to solve problems, we must get the facts. And it's these facts that we want to look at, not opinions, not innuendo, but the facts. Kaoru Ishikawa also said, quality is not an industry initiative and mandate. It is a national agenda item and mandate. I too believe that quality must be a mandate for the U.S., especially as we look at the nature of the processes about our electoral system. To achieve real election reform and electoral reform, we must apply these quality principles. That means to understand, by looking at the data, where the processes are broken. 2, we must then understand the root causes of the breaks in those processes, so that 3, we can define improvements that will prevent the recurrence of those broken processes. And those are the fundamental principles upon which we will operate in our reporting. This is an important day. It is a somber day because we're looking at broken processes. But it is a day of hope and optimism precisely because we are looking at those broken processes. And we look at them with the determination that we can overcome those broken processes to put in place mechanisms to assure the sanctity of every American citizen's right to vote. Their vote will be cast as they intended, counted as it was cast as they intended, and recounted as necessary to assure and verify that it was in fact counted as it was intended by the voters. And so with that, shall we begin with our testimony? Will our first set of panelists, our testifiers, please come to the testify table in the front? Okay. Panelists, speakers and testifiers, is what you're about to tell us the truth, the full truth, and only the truth as you know it?
Yes. So help me God.
Okay, thank you. Please, as you speak, state your name and the authority by which you speak. So I believe Bob.
You want me to give my bio, or just which tab are you? Microphone's not on. Testing. All right. My name is Bob Fitrakis. I'm a political science professor at Columbus State. I also have a JD, and I run the Columbus Free Press and freepress.org. Okay. Part of the background of my involvement goes to Election Day, and even before that. In 1994, I co-authored and edited the International Observer's report for the first free and fair elections in El Salvador. Out of that experience, I've been concerned with elections in the United States, which appear to have similar problems, and in some cases, perhaps worse. On Election Day, I was the election protection legal advisor for 2 wards in the central city of Columbus. the 55th Ward and the 5th Ward, primarily African-American neighborhoods, there were 8 polling places and 9 precincts. One was a dual precinct. So it is within that background, and also prior to the election, I had been writing for the Columbus Free Press and other endeavors from academic journals and elsewhere. So these problems I'm going to outline, and I'll stick to the problems. I've come up with some possible wide range of proposals, many of them which go to quality control principles and uniform procedures. But I've broken them into the following areas. Number one, the process of registering voters in Ohio, from my perspective, is fatally flawed and could easily overturn election results. I mean, the amount of people that are not being registered or incorrectly registered essentially often falls within the margin of error of this last presidential election. Thousands of voters were registered to vote that were registered to vote on time never received their voter registration cards. This is so fundamental. In many cases, you've got government entities from the library, the Bureau of Motor Vehicle, and the boards of elections, as well as private entities registering people to vote. What struck me as obvious is there's no receipt. So what I would think in most principles of quality control, particularly the government entities which issue other forms of receipt at the Bureau of Motor Vehicle, at the library, and at the Board of Election, can't give an easily scannable receipt that if there was some dispute, the person who lawfully registered under the law would have a backup to actually vote on election day. The number of people who claimed is well within the thousands, and this was not just a problem in Ohio. The problem was reported in Florida and in other states as well. And you would see the people on TV saying, well, we sent out those 25,000 voter registration card, and they would blame it on the U.S. mail. What I'm suggesting to your panel is that there's a way to solve that simple problem. Also, point 2, an estimated 34,000 former felons in Ohio who were eligible to vote. Ohio has a simple rule. You're in prison, you can't vote. You're on probation, halfway house, former felon, in jail, but not convicted, you may vote. 34,000 people eligible to vote were given incorrect information by public officials, correction officials, and the Board of Elections, including in Hamilton County, where they were incorrectly told that they needed a judge to sign off on their voter registration form. This clearly has a chilling effect on people on probation. Moreover, there's at least one documented criminal complaint, a 911 call from a downtown Holiday Inn, where individual citizens appeared to be intimidating people on probation, telling them if they showed up to vote, they would be rearrested. Also, if they had parking tickets and back child support, they would be arrested as well. What I'm suggesting is that if the public officials in Ohio don't know the law, we're in a serious problem. And it also would protect the rights of the former felons if, in fact, a simple pamphlet was given when they left the correctional institution, which advised them that they are indeed eligible to vote. 3, Franklin County, and this is related specifically to the former felons, which normally cancels 200 to 300 registration a year, decided oddly in this election year to cancel 3,500 registrations of former felons, dating back to 1998, people that were not even felons in this case, but had been indicted as felons. There was no standard procedure to discern between an indicted felon who pleaded to a misdemeanor and an actual felon. I would suggest the state has numerous databases that they could have accessed in a routine procedure. 4, Secretary of State J. Kenneth Blackwell ruled that any voter registration form on other than 80 bond paperweight would not be accepted. While this was legal in an archaic law in the days of the yellow sheets when I went to school, when everything was supposed to be on 80 bond cardboard yellow stock, is that the Secretary himself who made this ruling, the Columbus Dispatch reports, his bond was 60 paperweight, and that most boards of elections were operating under this law illegally because they now scan these registrations into the computer, and the 80 bond paperweight apparently does not scan well or jams the scanners. 5, in Cincinnati, 105,000 voters were moved from active to inactive status within the last 4 years prior to election. This is not required under Ohio law, but may be done. Just within the last week, tens of thousands of voters were purged in Franklin County as well. The process for doing this needs to be uniform. Is it the state or some counties, according to reports, printed newspaper reports, allow each of the political parties or any political party to write a certified letter? If you don't answer it, you may be purged as not living there anymore. This allows political parties to game the system and to essentially disenfranchise what they believe are the base voters of each other's parties. So this clearly needs to be addressed, the lack of uniformity. Under what rules may a voter be purged? Should there be a national rule? Should there be a statewide rule? Or does each county get to decide based on which political party controls that county? Also, I would raise the question, my 6th point, of private companies with partisan political connections and histories of donations being hired to process voter registrations. This clearly has the appearance of impropriety and should be addressed by this panel. I have a variety of reform suggestions for voter registration, which I'd be glad to address if the panel wishes, but I'll proceed to go through what are the obvious problems from my perspective. Let's turn to absentee and provisional ballots. Complaints of confusing design of some absentee ballots, particularly in Franklin County, were reminiscent of the butterfly ballot in Florida in the year 2000. On many absentee forms, again, you had to vote to the middle. Kerry, on one ballot that I saw, was listed 3rd, but in order to vote for him, you had to punch hole 4. If you punched hole 4, you voted for Bush. So, depending on the ballot rotation, and in other cases, because of the problem of Ralph Nader dropping off, you actually didn't pick the line they were on. Say Bush was on 4 and you wanted to vote for him, you may have had to go back and vote 3. This type of ballot design, I'm not sure in any way, aids in the voting process. 2, the Franklin County Board of Elections called or wrote an undetermined number of voters who obtained absentee ballots, saying their addresses were incorrect. In at least 2 documented cases, they sent that notice of cancellation to the correct address. So at some point, we've got to figure out exactly why people with the correct address are getting essentially mailings that they're registered. And in the case of this individual, he had lived at the house for 20 years, and we had authenticated that. 3, the question of Republican challengers, 10,000 and 3,000 Democrats to counter those challengers. The board might want to consider the atmosphere that is created in the polling place when partisan challengers are allowed under what I believe archaic laws, but international voting observers were threatened with arrest. I sat in a meeting at the Franklin County Board of Election with the international observers, many distinguished individuals from around the world, and they were told if they violated the 100-foot rule, they would be arrested. One of the few democracies that would do that. As the Franklin County Director, Matt Damschroeder, pointed it out, not in an adversarial way, but just said this was the directive from the Secretary of State. So a variety of what goes on in these polling places, we may need to document it. And I would almost suggest at a certain point that not cameras in the voting booths, but perhaps at the overall operations to see the absolute chaos and to improve the quality of clearly what was breaking down in Ohio this November 2nd. Ohio Secretary of State J. Kenneth Blackwell, in a very well-known decision, reversed a long-standing Ohio practice and barred voters from casting provisional ballots within their county and then within the same polling site, if it was a dual polling site, if they were in the wrong precinct. This problem takes on tremendous dimension in that, I would note, at Franklin Alternative, where Reverend Moss voted, there were no signs indicating what precinct line went to which polling place. They wound around, they ran out the door into a freezing rain, so it was possible to wait in line 3 hours and 15 minutes and get to the polling table and be told you were in the wrong precinct. No greeter, no directions. Many people I witnessed, at least 30 in a half-hour period, leaving because they refused to stand back in line for another 3 hours and 15 minutes. I also witnessed a mother being arrested. She actually went home and cooked dinner for her family and had her daughter stand in line to hold her place. When she came back, she was told she was line cutting and she was escorted out by the Columbus Police Department. This seems to be an obvious problem. Now, this is tied into the precinct problem as well. Precincts were changed during the 2004 election year, almost, it seemed, at the whim of the Secretary of State. Is that also under oath testimony before Congressman Nay's committee in Ohio by both Republican and Democratic boards of election officials indicated that the polling information on the Secretary of State's website was 6 months old. So people going to that site, some people trying to help people find polling places, move on in some of those, were directing people to the wrong polling places. Other people were directing them to the wrong polling places that often were more logical. Let me give you my example. I live on the corner of Bryden and Wilson in the Near East Side of Columbus. I can walk across my street and up a quarter block to Franklin Alternative and vote. It's about 1/10 of a mile away. However, I have been assigned to the model neighborhood facilities more than a half mile away. Now, if somebody called me up and said, "Why are you voting there?" had I not known where I was voting, I would logically think I was voting right across the street. So we began to refer to these not as your neighborhood polling place, but the polling place to which J. Kenneth Blackwell assigned you. Now, these things were changing. Were Ohio under the Voting Rights Act of 1965, all of this would have had to be pre-screened, stabilized well in advance. Is that utter chaos was created in Ohio on Election Day by the arbitrary switching of polling places, including some in Cleveland, where they changed the locations longstanding within schools under a, quote, emergency, and none of it was promulgated, which is really a key and massive problem. I've already talked about the apparent dirty tricks operatives who were directing people to the wrong polling places. But even more of a problem were sincere individuals that were trying to help going to the websites of outdated precincts and directing them to the wrong polling places. Polling places, again, are illogically assigned, not closest to the voter's home. This created numerous provisional ballot problems. Some polling places, again, that contain more than one precinct, not clearly marked. Eyewitnesses also swear that in certain central city wards, and this is sworn under oath, that the polling books appeared to be 10 to 20 years old. There appears to be no standardized procedure. And the explanation was, well, someone accidentally put out the old stored polling books. So having lived in a place for 10, 15, 20 years, you went there, your neighbor who had moved out of the neighborhood 15 years ago was on the voting roll, but you weren't. There should be a standardized procedure by which the most current polling books are at the polling site. And somebody has to be responsible for this. A public official has to be punished either in job capacity or through fine or possible criminal charges, depending on the circumstances, if you've got 5 and 10 year polling books outdated at your polling sites. Also, election protection observers indicated that the polling workers were not well trained. No one seemed to know the rules. Many did not seem to know how to issue a provisional ballot. Many didn't know how to respond when machines were broken. What they would often say is, it's been doing that all day. Voters who pushed for one candidate and the vote faded away or hopped to another, often under oath, they've sworn when they complained about it, they were told, well, it's been doing that all day. There apparently needs to be a procedure by which you remove faulty machinery and have, I would suggest, backup at the site. Election day problems, and I don't know how much time I have left. 6 minutes. I'll read these quite rapidly. They're very long. International and local election observers and nonpartisan voting rights advocates were not allowed access to polling places, including, of course, the media was thrown out in Warren County when somebody apparently had the power at the Board of Election to call a homeland alert applying only to the Board of Elections building. And ballots, election workers have sworn under oath, were diverted to a non-authorized warehouse. That is problematic. 2, denial of curbside voting for handicapped voters. I witnessed the woman who stood in line for 2.5 hours, fainted, and then was told that she had to get back in line. She was on chemotherapy. She was in her 60s. She did not vote. I requested curbside voting of an absentee or provisional ballot, and they were told no, that it violated equal protection, even though people were inside the polls voting on provisional ballots. 3, broken and malfunctioning DRE voting machines, including machines that when a vote was cast, I've already talked about it, switched to another candidate or faded away. We were told by computer science expert it may be a default setting problem. We also received verifiable complaints, although anonymous, but we checked out the individuals saying that in certain cases the machines, when you voted for a write-in, it defaulted to a partisan candidate and the write-in was not recorded. OptiScan machines, of course, froze up. Calibration problems, there's got to be some uniform notion of calibration. You should not have to put that in 4 or 5 times in order for it to take. And then, of course, end up shoving them underneath and perhaps mangling the ballots. As we sit here today, 92,000 overvotes, undervotes, machine-rejected ballots, either OptiScans or DREs with some paper trail, have never, and punch cards, have never been counted in Ohio. Shortage of voting machines in Franklin County. Again, it seems obvious that if you need 5,000 voting machines, you should not be allowed to conduct an election with 2,866 by your own numbers, of which you only put out 2,741, and you hold back 76 for emergencies, 42 of them in the African-American wards of the inner city, and all 76 in the city of Columbus. 6, faulty transmission of data. Gehenna Ward 1B, 638 people vote, 4,258 votes are recorded for the president, on which that data John Kerry conceded. Also, those machines were put out. We were told by computer experts, a Republican computer expert, that the machines were easily hackable by access to the back, and they were put out, according to the Board of Election, up to 1 month in advance with no security. Also, one machine in Toledo was put out and at a school, and the principal called in sick, hence people did not get to vote in that precinct. The intolerably long lines, no one should have to wait 7 or 8 hours in Columbus, and no one should have to wait up to 14 hours at Kenyon College. If you have 1,300 voters, you were supposed to have, by a court decision, 13 machines. If you have 2 machines and one is broken, we are in trouble. The apparent Homeland Security I've already addressed, irregular and non-uniform procedures in regards to reporting of voting results in certain Ohio counties. That is, after 100% of the votes came in Miami County, the 19,000 more votes came in at the exact same percentage. When I called to inquire about why this would happen, they said it can't be a reporting area. We do it, I did it the same way I always do. I get the disk, I take it back to my home, and I post it on my home computer, and I have a legitimate contract with Miami County. Been doing it that way for years. This is problematic. Sworn reports of pre-punched presidential ballots in Cuyahoga County. There's got to be a procedure by which some official actually looks at the ballots and makes sure it hasn't been pre-punched. Improperly high voter turnouts in certain precincts. We should be able to figure out why 124% and 120% of the voters can vote in Perry County. Why, when we received the logs of that poll, more people had voted than had signed in. There's got to be a procedure by which to match the people signing in with the actual vote total. Over 100% of voter turnout, again, in these 2 Perry County precincts. Of course, they were then later decertified, recertified, and everything was made okay. Double counting of the presidential votes that were cast absentee in Sandusky County. As I wrap up quickly, sworn reports of last-second precinct location adjustments in Cuyahoga County, I've already talked about. Sworn reports of voting machines locked in principal's office, voting machines at the close of polls being wheeled in with no chain of custodies, pushed in at 7:30. I don't see where were those cartridges all day? Were they secured, and why? And then you count those in saying we have enough machinery. So people vote on 2 machines all day. At 7:30 with lines out the door and a court order, suddenly you push in 2 machines and claim, well, there were 4 machines there. Yes, as of 7:30 in the evening. Under an archaic Ohio law, both Democrats and Republicans in a slate of 5 candidates, again, were allowed challengers, lack of accommodations for handicapped, DRE voting machines placed at polling places up to 1 month in advance. All of these things, which I've reiterated here today, are causes for concern. And it seems in a high-tech, post-industrial society like the United States, there are solutions.
Bob, can I get a copy of your notes?
Yeah, I'll send them electronically, and I'd be glad to leave these. It's part of a much larger summary I'm doing to systematically outline and document with affidavits what happened in Ohio. I'd be glad to forward those to the panel.
I had another question. This is a lot of terrific information. Is this kind of phenomenon, the things you're describing, is that, do you have a historical perspective on prior elections? Are these innovative phenomenon? Or?
Let me put it this way. I have not seen such voting irregularities in the history of Ohio voting. I've been in the state since 1987. whether a Democrat was Secretary of State Sherrod Brown or the now Governor Bob Taft, the level of the problems never existed. Both of those Secretaries of State took it upon themselves that their job was to register as many people as possible and have smooth elections. That is, they were into enfranchising people as opposed to disenfranchising people. This goes to the question of the partisan nature of the Secretary of State's office. I have come to the conclusion that the key office, if you want to get elected or win an election in Ohio, as in Florida in 2000, may be to have the Secretary of State co-chair your campaign. Machines have never been missing. There's never been a problem with mass loss of voter registration. This was historically new phenomena and very, very dangerous to the democratic fabric of this country. And you might consider whether or not the Secretary of State's office or some other agency that is nonpartisan should really be conducting these elections.
Dr. Fitrakis, your point is very well taken there, and I did want to come back to you spoke earlier about holding election officials accountable for the processes. What level, at what level of individual or position is the top management? And here's the point. One of the quality management principles is management must be accountable for the quality of the results of the processes that they oversee. So my question is, who would be that election official who should be held accountable?
We uncovered a letter through Freedom of Information, open records request. Essentially, the Secretary of State threatened all election officials, and this is under oath as well at Congressman Nay's committee, both Democrats and Republicans. The letter actually is addressed to Bob Bennett, the chair of the Ohio Republican Party, who also is the chair of the Cuyahoga Board of Elections. And J. Kenneth Blackwell, the Secretary of State, threatened him with firing if he did not adhere to the new and last-minute directives on provisional ballots. Matt Damschroeder, who again is former chair of the Franklin County Republican Party, I talked to him. He said, I would love to count these provisional ballots. That is what I would do at the Franklin County Board of Election. The more than 600 people who could have had their votes been counted in the spring because they were at the right polling place, wrong precinct. But he said, I can't. Secretary of State says I'll be in violation. While they portray it as a bipartisan system, under Ohio law, every single Board of Election official is appointed or approved by the Secretary of State and serves at his pleasure.
You're suggesting that the Secretary of State is
in Ohio.
In Ohio.
On the other hand, there's a whole variety of other decisions that you would suspect the Secretary of State would want to be uniform in terms of counting ballots and procedures and poll training, and that is apparently just left up to county boards of election, thus creating wide disparity. Bill Anthony, the chair of the Franklin County Board of Election, one of his explanations on why 76 machines were not put out, causing great, great hardship in the Central City wards in Columbus, was that poll workers waved them off. They said they didn't need them. And at the time I said, that's absurd. A worker that works 1 day a year or 2 at the most can waive off the assignment required under HAVA, the identification of machines and the actual assignment to a precinct. That is the most absurd thing I've ever heard. Somebody, in this case, although Bill Anthony, he's a Democrat, I suggested he needed to resign. Is that what sort of system would allow temporary 1-day labor to essentially destroy well-laid plans that had been done months in advance?
Okay, thank you. Eve?
I have a question, Mr. Fitrakis. When I was in Ohio for a month after the election doing investigation of the processes in Greene County, my question to you is the local director, I believe they called her the Bureau of Elections director, conducted the election. If those positions were elective in each county, would that make a difference?
I don't think so. I think it would just make it more political, which is part of the problem. And not only that, there's another problem which I should have raised, is that most of the Board of Election officials who are there, usually it works as the party that has won the vote for governor or president gets to appoint the director, then the deputy directors from the other party, excluding all independents and third parties, and then the board chair comes from the opposition party, is that most of them are absolutely, or appear to me to be absolutely unaware of how any of their computers work, from central tabulators to machines, is that they're totally dependent on private contractors, from Triad to ESS to Diebold, and that if anyone shows up with a badge at the polling site or at the Board of Elections, they seem to have access to do things as they did in Hocking County, to simply change out a hard drive in the middle of a recount without a vote total, and then offer a cheat sheet so that the random count matches. So again, I think that perhaps the establishment of a truly well-paid, nonpartisan election procedure with employees that can be fired, terminated, and held through civil fine or criminal liability may be the only way to go. I would suggest that there's an inherent tendency for both parties to want to work the system to their advantage at the county level. But a far greater problem is the fact that in Fairfield County, when we asked for the election results, people at the Board of Election didn't know how to get their own election results. They had to call Triad to forward the election results to them, to then email them to us. And to me, that is a huge problem.
Thank you, Dr. Fitrakis. Next, we have Reverend Bill Moss, and I think we have a total of
I have a question.
Okay. In light of our time, I think we may submit written questions. Is that sufficient?
That's fine.
For response? Okay, so we can move on. Reverend Moss, we have a total of about 15 minutes, including time for questions.
I am Bill Moss. I am a past member of the Columbus Board of Education, elected 5 times. My background includes 8 years of active Army and Reserve time in the U.S. Army. I'm a broadcaster by training and profession with more than 50 years of experience as a newscaster, as a general manager, and other areas in the operation of radio and television. I have operated my own business, but more important to the point is I know something about the conduct of elections, particularly in Franklin County. My wife, who is a retired school teacher there in the district, served as a precinct worker and a judge numerous times over the years, and she knows a bit about the conduct of elections as well. And before I give my prepared statement, let me suggest that while it's very important that we seek out ways to prevent the kind of tragic crime that took place on Election Day in Ohio and other places, for future elections, given the fact that we have witnessed 2 successive presidential elections that were very questionable. And given the fact that the information that has been alluded to and that we have witnessed regarding the most recent presidential election, a great crime has been committed against the American people, and to go forward and to say we will do no more than seek to prevent this from occurring in the future, it seems to me is not sufficient, because I strongly believe that if we do not address the crime that was committed in the last election, our work regarding future elections will be an exercise in futility. My wife Ruth and I believe that, in the words of the martyred President Abraham Lincoln, and I quote, "Important principles may and must be inflexible," end quote. One adamantine principle of our republic must certainly be the inviolable integrity of the electoral process upon which rests the people's faith in their form of government. America asserts, in virtue of having built with blood and labor an advanced democracy, that she has a moral, indeed a providential duty to promote the idea of self-governance abroad, even at the point of a gun. So vigorous a policy bears good fruit only if the world outside our borders believes that America's interventions proceed authentically from her own decent practice and an uncompromised fidelity to timeless democratic principles. However, the world has viewed with contempt and disgust the last two presidential elections, which at best are questionable and at worst irremediably tainted with suspicion of malfeasance. The world, however, cannot stand against our military might, yet we, the free citizens of the United States of America, are bound in duty, in conscience, and in justice to take a stand against the villainy that threatens to savage our democracy and forever shatter our credibility before the world community. In recent years, this nation has endured a series of corporate scandals which, coupled with the two successive tarnished presidential elections, have led many to question the legitimacy of America's corporate and governmental leadership. We had not yet recovered from the unconstitutional delivery of the presidency to George W. Bush in 2000 in Florida, when we were told last November to accept his re-election in spite of documented reports of voter disenfranchisement and the wholesale violation of the citizens' right to vote in Ohio. In short, we saw the president and his party engage in the same kind of fraud, deceit, illegal manipulation of the people's resources, and betrayal of trust that characterize America's corporations and financial institutions, which this government has for too long refused to regulate. The list of abuses that took place in Ohio is legion, and they cry out for justice. The Bush-Cheney campaign secured victory in Ohio by means of dirty tricks, disinformation, intimidation by challenging voters at the polls, deliberate shorting of voting machines in predominantly Democratic and minority neighborhoods, and oversupplying voter machines in mostly Republican, white, and rural areas. Lines that required, in some instances, a wait of more than 8 hours discouraged citizens from voting. My wife and I, for example, left our polling place at 10 a.m. in the morning because of the long lines, only to return at 3 o'clock to find the lines even longer. At last, at 6:30 p.m., we were able to cast our vote. We, however, were fortunate, for we exercised our right to vote in spite of the fraud. As Americans, however, we were outraged at the cynical flaunting of civic values. Accordingly, along with several other fellow citizens, we determined to seek simple justice and bring an action at law. We specifically petitioned the court's judgment against Ohio's chief elections officer. Moreover, the Secretary of State violated conflict of interest prohibitions by co-chairing the Bush-Cheney re-election committee while concurrently working to intimidate voters, disenfranchise his fellow citizens, and suppress the vote through a deliberate failure to A, prepare for the record-breaking November 2nd turnout, which both political parties had predicted, and B, to provide a sufficient number of voting machines to accommodate the augmented electorate. Bob and I were at the polling place, and we talked, and we witnessed some of these violations firsthand. And I say to you, the importance of our work here today is such that the very Constitution that we love, the democracy that we embrace and that we look to perfect, is more at risk today because of what we've described that took place on Election Day than at any time that I can remember in my lifetime. And I've paid attention since high school to government and to politics. We're engaged in important work, and I commend you for organizing this effort. Thank you.
In my earlier statement, I said no process and no problem will go overlooked. There are no sacred cows. If we do see that the evidence indicates, at best, there's conflict of interest that we see, there's potential for strong bias. If we see evidence of a crime, if we see evidence of vote tampering, of fraud, we must, with integrity, call attention to that and call for investigation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, I'd like to add a comment there. I think that there's something to say about election processes as such. It's just kind of inherent that you have to take a very holistic view of the situation. It's not, a business production line you're talking about. The thing that I wanted to ask you, which is not to counter your concern about the prosecution of a crime, is if we can step outside of the business process perspective and let me ask you, what, in your words, what are the processes that you depend on to actually determine whether intentional fraud occurred? And what are the obstacles that you encountered in those processes that interfered with your ability to seek justice?
Well, first of all, we know from past experience, election officials know the number of registered voters that they have on the rolls. They have a history of voter turnout, which in their minds is so reliable that they predict what the turnouts will be at various elections. And with that ability, it's incumbent, it seems to me, upon them to make sure that adequate resources are provided to accommodate the potential election or those who would be participating. That's number one. And then safeguarding the citizens' right to go to the polls, cast their votes without interference without intimidation, to monitor beforehand indications that dirty tricks will be employed. There was sufficient evidence that this would take place. Give you an example. I have never seen 5 police squad cars congregated at a polling place, which they were on the election day at my polling place. I've never seen that before. And we can walk down the street to where I vote at Franklin Middle School, where my wife used to teach. We didn't that day because it was raining. And I asked myself, why are the police here? Well, given the indicators leading up to the election, there were reports of the Republicans sending in poll challengers, people from outside of our community who would challenge our citizens as to their legitimate right to vote on that day. Now, what were the police there for? Did they expect trouble? And if they did, why? And what was done to make sure that they were not, in fact, the intimidating factor? And who were they there to protect? The intimidators? Because we never had a problem before.
I just want to make a follow-up kind of a comment. Based on what you said, for instance, the police cars present in the voting location, it would appear that to take that and turn it backwards, you just say what you're talking about is what is appropriate security procedures during the conduct of an election. And if in fact, the question being whether it's really appropriate to have a lot of police dedicated to a particular place and so forth, it can always be taken that way.
But you'd have to justify that against past experiences.
Right.
And what are the indicators that would cause that to be a special situation on this particular election day?
Right.
Okay.
If I could add just one thing. Hello.
Use this one here. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I can add one thing there with Bill that day. When we were only allowed to direct, the only way your provisional ballot would be counted is if you went to the Franklin County Board of Election, right? And at that location, there were a dozen buses out front. There were brought in concrete barriers. There were a phalanx of armed police, all white. There were metal detectors everywhere and additional security in town. One person I directed came back and said, there's no way I'm voting there. It's just like, and other attempts to have other locations, including at the polling places, were disallowed. So the security also goes to, where people vote and under what conditions. If we have any other questions, we'll submit them to you. Okay, Reverend Moss. Okay, our time is up. Next, we have Dr. Richard Hayes Phillips. Dr. Phillips, would you introduce yourself? Thank you.
My name is Dr. Richard Hayes Phillips. I have degrees in politics, geography, history, and geomorphology. I am a retired college professor. I have twice been a recognized expert in federal proceedings as a hydrologist presenting forensic statistical data to the courts with an eye for anomalous data that differ from the general pattern, and I used some of the same analytical techniques as an expert witness deposed under oath in the Moss v. Bush lawsuit in the state of Ohio. I have investigated the Ohio election results precinct by precinct, and have found 3 categories of problems: voter suppression, ballots cast but not counted, and alteration of the vote count. In the city of Columbus, discriminatory allocation of voting machines led directly to lower voter turnout in Democratic precincts. Urban Democratic precincts had too few voting machines and long lines. Suburban Republican precincts had enough voting machines and short lines. 122 voting machines were not provided to any polling station anywhere. As a result, turnout was 60% in Bush precincts, but only 50% in Kerry precincts. This wrongly reduced Kerry's margin of victory in Franklin County by about 17,000 votes. In Lucas County, other means of voter suppression led directly to lower voter turnout in Democratic precincts. The 88 precincts with the lowest turnout were all in Toledo. All were won by John Kerry, and complaints were filed in 31 of these precincts. Among the complaints were longtime residents removed from the voting rolls, broken voting machines, polling stations running out of ballots and turning people away, voters sent back and forth between polling places, and long lines not designated by precinct so that voters waited in the wrong line. 1/3 of provisional ballots were not counted, often because people voted at the wrong table in the right polling place. Statewide, there were 35,000 provisional ballots and over 92,000 regular ballots cast but not counted as votes for president. These uncounted ballots, most of them punch cards, are highly concentrated in precincts that voted overwhelmingly for John Kerry, by margins of 12-1 in Cleveland, 7-1 in Dayton, 5-1 in Cincinnati, 4.5-1 in Akron, 3-1 in Lorain County, 2.7-1 in Stark County, and 2.3-1 in Trumbull County. This cries out for an examination of the uncounted ballots and the machines that failed to count them. In the state of Ohio, the order in which the candidates' names appear on the ballot rotates from precinct to precinct. The sequence remains the same, but the starting point differs. If voters stood in the wrong line and placed their punch cards in voting machines not intended for their precinct, their votes were shifted to candidates not of their choosing. In Cleveland, where Kerry had overwhelming support, there are many obvious examples where votes intended for Kerry were shifted to Bush or to third-party candidates or into the column left void when Ralph Nader was removed from the ballot. This artificially reduced voter turnout and wrongly reduced Kerry's margin of victory in Cuyahoga County by about 22,000 votes. Also, there are complaints and sworn affidavits from voters in Cuyahoga County who were given punch cards with the hole for George W. Bush already punched out of them. In Miami County, after 100% of the precincts had reported, more than 18,000 votes were added to the totals. The vote percentages for Bush and Kerry remained the same, and the final margin for Bush was 16,000 votes exactly, almost as if the tabulators were programmed to turn out that way. This resulted in voter turnout as high as 98.55% in one precinct, where a door-to-door canvass of voters identified more than enough non-voters to prove the certified results are fraudulent. In Mahoning County, the Board of Elections reported that 20 to 30 touchscreen machines had to be recalibrated because votes were being counted for the wrong candidates. Voters had to scroll through as many as 5 times before their choices for president were registered. In some precincts, machines failed to record votes for Kerry and defaulted to no choice at all. In other precincts, touchscreens were programmed to default to candidate Bush unless the voter successfully overrode the default choice. These voters either saw the touchscreen hop from Kerry to Bush or never saw a presidential choice appear on the screen and yet were recorded as having voted for president. 3 counties in southwestern Ohio, Butler, Claremont, and Warren, provided Bush with a combined plurality greater than his statewide margin of victory. These results, when examined at the precinct level, are nearly impossible to explain. In Butler County, there were 12 precincts where, compared to 2000, voter registration increased by 34% to 178%, and entire townships where Kerry received fewer votes than Gore, despite large increases in voter turnout. In Claremont County, there were 24 such precincts where Kerry received fewer votes than Gore. In Warren County, there were 6 entire townships where voter registration increased by 28% to 79%. In all 3 counties, Kerry received fewer votes than Ellen Connolly, a little-known, underfunded African-American municipal judge from Cleveland running for Chief Justice. There must have been at least 13,500 voters who supported both Connolly and Bush, or else the certified results are fraudulent. In these 3 counties and in Delaware County as well, Bush received more votes than Issue 1, the constitutional amendment prohibiting gay marriage. There must have been at least 10,500 voters who supported gay marriage and who voted for Bush, or else the certified results are fraudulent. A comparison of these counties with the statewide voting pattern indicates that as many as 50,000 votes may have been shifted from Kerry to Bush, thus affecting the margin by 100,000 votes. These accounts of voter suppression, ballots cast but uncounted, and alteration of the vote count were sufficient to reverse the outcome of the presidential election. It is my professional opinion, having exhaustively examined the available evidence, that the 2004 presidential election was stolen.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. I have a couple of questions. And this also, the first question applies Reverend Moss and Dr. Fitrakis. Are you suggesting that there be an investigation into some of the evidence that has been uncovered as to potential wrongdoing?
I have suggested for months that there should be a criminal investigation in Ohio, beginning with Matthew Schroeder, J. Kenneth Blackwell, and other persons who were in a position to affect the outcome. I have prepared a single-spaced 5-page statement of forensic evidence needed, and if we ever have standing to obtain such evidence, I would make it available.
Let me respond this way.
Microphone, please.
Thank you. Because of what because of what we witnessed ourselves and because of the phone calls that came into me, people know me so well in Columbus as somewhat of a lightning rod for problems and suggestions as to how to deal with them. They called and made complaints. And then with the hearings, the rallies that Bob and I worked together to make happen there in Columbus, and people coming in from across the state testifying under oath as to what happened with them, my wife and I agreed to be lead plaintiffs in a lawsuit against Bush Cheney Blackwell. And we actually filed a case at the Ohio Supreme Court. Now, when the Congress certified the electors from Ohio, and then Bush was given the presidency, our attorneys, and Bob can speak to this, withdrew so that the court did not rule on a mootness verdict. But that lawsuit has still not been pursued. And it's my understanding it can go into federal court. And that's one way to get an investigation. That's one way to depose witnesses, depose officials, and because I always, what stays in my mind in this whole thing is what happened in Watergate. It wasn't the little crime of the watchman finding the tape wire going into the Watergate complex. It was the cover-up afterwards. And if we start deposing these people, and they have to start telling lies to cover their tracks, there's where we'll get at the truth, and the whole crime will be, and all of its scale will be revealed to the public.
Okay. Part of the problem which this panel should consider is how do you in fact challenge an election? We immediately, we called public hearings, and what the DNC has recently called anecdotal evidence, to the contrary, were the largest public hearings that we know of in the history of Ohio. We put hundreds and hundreds of people under oath with, again, court reporters. We had them sign sworn affidavits. Here's part of what happened is we sent people under public records to Fairfield County and Perry County who pulled and made copies of the polling logs. That was immediately locked down by the Secretary of State, so we couldn't have access. To this day, we've never been able to get forensic computer experts who told us about the default problems to look at the machines. Under the Ohio Challenge Law, we were given it's cutting out, yeah. We were given 10 days to get our evidence. The Attorney General of the state wrote us a letter. This is a statute. It's an original action before the Supreme Court. 10 days for discovery. The Attorney General of the state wrote us and said, under Ohio civil procedure, we don't have to honor any subpoena for 14 days. So how can we get discovery under a statute? And then they threatened to sanction us, and they actually moved to sanction us, to hold us individually responsible, and to fine us and possibly suspend our license for attempting under the statute to collect and gather evidence. We were also told in a phone call, which we sent a letter, saying under no circumstances would J. Kenneth Blackwell ever submit to a deposition under oath in this situation. And now in House Bill 3, which has just passed the House in Ohio, their solution to the problem is to outlaw a challenge to any federal election under Ohio law. That is not the solution.
Dr. Phillips, second question to you. In looking at the statistical information, did you consider all other types of possibilities that might explain the variance in the votes and the anomalies that you saw in the various sets of information you examined?
I consider. Hello?
Yeah.
Testing.
You're on.
I considered everything I could think of. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. You might want to refine your question.
From a statistical standpoint, were there any other hypotheses that might have been potential hypotheses to explain the phenomenon you saw?
For which phenomenon? I mean,
I think he did. I discussed some of this with, for example, in Warren County, one hypothesis is ballots were diverted to the last second based on a Homeland Security threat to an unauthorized warehouse and stuff. What else could be is you may have had the greatest unforeseen last-second turnout in Ohio history, and there may have been, these people may have hidden and been reluctant to talk to exit poll people, and you know, hid in bathrooms or just rushed by or weren't seen. So, I mean, or you could have had a very strong libertarian vote in Warren County. Or in Warren County, somebody may have accidentally, we don't know whether it's intentional, but somebody could have taken 10,000 votes, easily done in 90 seconds on a central tabulator, and instead of putting them in the Bush County, in the Carey County, put them in the Bush column, thus creating a 20,000 gap, which would make that statistic much more likely. Bush would still win overwhelmingly, but you wouldn't have this massive 109,000 to 54,000 gap, which is virtually unexplainable. Because in some way it looks like they took a base of 28%, and despite the fact that Gore had pulled out of the state the last 3 months and spent no money, the largest record number of spending for a Democrat presidential candidate occurred, and there were 1,000 volunteers. So there could have been either an inadvertent computer glitch and or an intentional switch.
I think the only way for me to answer your question is point by point, and I'll try to be concise. The alternative in Columbus would be that Democrats don't like to vote, and that there was a lower turnout in Democrat precincts because of a lack of enthusiasm. But I found, by investigating every precinct in Columbus and every ward in the suburbs, that too few voting machines depresses the turnout no matter who the candidate, because it happened in some Bush precincts as well. In Lucas County, one alternative is that the Carey precincts had lower turnout and the Bush precincts had higher turnout because the central tabulators were altered and tampered with. That's a possibility. I haven't the access to the evidence to investigate that. What's the alternative explanation to uncounted ballots being highly concentrated in precincts that voted overwhelmingly for John Kerry? That voters in inner city precincts are too unsophisticated or inexperienced or just too downright ignorant to be able to vote properly? There were precincts in the suburbs of Summit County that had high numbers of uncounted ballots as well, and these just happened to be precincts that were carried by John Kerry, where these arguments about ignorant inner-city people cannot possibly be correct. In Cleveland, I don't really believe that turnout could have been as low as 13% or 19% or 21% in an election that a majority of people in both parties, according to national polls, regarded as the most important election of their lifetimes. I don't believe that in an inner city, predominantly black precinct where Al Gore would get 98% of the vote, that there could have been scores or even hundreds of voters who suddenly switched their allegiance to the Libertarian or to the Constitution Party, which is known for its advocacy of gun ownership and for its policy restricting immigration. Okay. I do not believe that I did not believe that in Miami County, turnout could have been as high as 98.55% in certain precincts, but Bob Fitrakis took it upon himself to investigate that and find out. And he found 25 voters, registered voters, who say they did not vote in a precinct where the official results say that all but 10 voters voted. That county is proven fraudulent. In Mahoning County, the Board of Elections told the press on election night that 20 to 30 voting machines had to be recalibrated because the votes were hopping from Democrats to Republicans. And they withheld the election results for 4 hours trying to figure out what had gone wrong. And in the counties in southwestern Ohio, I'm not just comparing numbers, I'm looking precinct by precinct at the same bodies, the same souls, the same people on the same voting machines on the same day who must have voted for both Ellen Connolly and George Bush, or voted for gay marriage and for George Bush in order for the results to be true and correct, and I do not believe that they are.
Okay, thank you very much.
Certainly.
Larry, how are we doing for time here? Could I just ask one question?
We may have some follow-on questions for you, Dr. Phillips.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Kathy Dopp, you have 30 minutes, and then we will have opportunity for break, I believe.
Hello? Can you hear me? You say no? My name is Kathy Dopp. I'm the founder and president of U.S. Count Votes. We are sponsoring the National Election Data Archive, which is a scientific research project whose mission is to objectively investigate the accuracy of elections. Are we going to switch? The National Election Data Archive has about 24 PhD mathematicians and statisticians in our group, volunteers. And I'm also a member of the Open Voting Consortium, which is a group of computer scientists who have been working since the 2000 election to design better voting systems. Today in America, U.S. votes are counted without performing any independent audits or analysis to detect vote miscounts, although voting machines are known to be able to miscount votes without leaving a trace of evidence, and paper ballots are easily stuffed and miscounted. This leaves American democracy susceptible to insider vote embezzlement, innocent errors, and electronic failures. U.S. elections and exit poll data indicates widespread vote miscounts in many states, not just Ohio and Florida. How can we then ensure that the integrity and legitimacy of our elections? U.S. Count Votes recommends routine hand-counted audits of paper ballots in a small percentage of randomly selected precincts as soon as the polls close. 2, public release of detailed precinct-level election data that would allow independent analysts to investigate and detect irregular vote counts in time for candidates to contest the election results and request investigations prior to conceding. And 3, we recommend that people solicit the advice of computer scientists who are experts in voting systems and have no conflict of interest whenever purchasing or setting guidelines for voting equipment or voting systems. In Utah, as founder of Utah Count Votes, I work with a group of PhD computer scientists, including David Dill and former president of the Association for Computing Machinery, Barbara Simons, and several professors from Brigham Young University and University of Utah. And they make this statement about the current generation of DRE, electronic ballot voting machines. The current generation of electronic DRE voting machines are not secure, do not provide voters with a way to know that their votes are being tabulated correctly, and do not provide a mechanism for effective recounts when errors arise. Computer scientists who have looked at the problem have concluded that the only way to prevent problems is to ensure that you provide a method for auditing the result and provide for independent recounts. U.S. Count Votes statisticians have looked at New Mexico's detailed presidential election results data from the 2004 presidential election, and we found some interesting patterns. Ballots that contain no selection for president have been referred to as undervotes. There was an abnormally high rate of undervotes in the presidential race in New Mexico's electronic machines. In other words, New Mexico uses OpScan machines in some counties and electronic machines in other counties. We found that the OpScan ballots had a normal rate of undervotes, but in the DRE electronic machines, some precincts had as high as 19% of undervotes in the presidential race, where supposedly people went to vote and cast no vote for president. But this problem was masked in the data in the way it's normally reported, because there were also a high rate of what's called phantom votes, where there were more absentee ballots counted than were cast. There were 2,000 more votes counted than were actually cast in the absentee ballot category in just the presidential race alone. In looking at some of the data in other states, there have been researchers in Washington state that have also compared voting patterns in the electronically counted votes versus the mail-in paper ballot votes. And in Washington state, in Snohomish County, the same exact precincts, so there was no demographic difference in the voters. If you voted on an absentee mail-in ballot or a paper mail-in ballot, the probability was that you voted for the Democrat for both the U.S. presidential race and the governor's race. But if you voted on the electronic ballot voting machines, the probability was that you voted for the Republican candidate for both the governor's race and the presidential race. And of course, we know that electronic ballot machines can be easily subverted, but also mail-in ballots can be easily padded. In Florida, in the OpScan counties, in both the 2000 and the 2004 presidential races, the Miami Herald did recounts, and we found that when the Miami Herald recounted the 2000 presidential race, enough votes shifted from the Bush column back to the Gore column that Gore would have won Florida if he had asked for a recount statewide in all the OpScan counties. And there was a little-known Miami Herald recount in the 2004 presidential race where they counted 2.7 counties in the OpScan counties, and enough votes shifted from the Bush back to the Kerry column so that if you multiplied those votes out based on a proportion of the population that those counties were, Kerry would have won Florida in 2004. However, that calculation doesn't necessarily hold. The U.S. Count Votes National Election Data Archive Project, we've also looked at the exit poll discrepancies in the presidential race in 2004. And we have found historically unprecedented discrepancy between the 2004 election exit polls and the reported election results. And 7 months after the election, no credible explanation has been offered in terms of why exit poll error would cause such a discrepancy. And the data that would allow for independent analysts to investigate has not been released. The Edison-Matovsky exit pollsters' hypothetical claimed that the Kerry and Bush voter exit poll response rates were 56% for Kerry voters and 50% for Bush voters. And our group found that by looking at the data, this absolutely cannot explain the exit-poll discrepancy, and the data is not consistent with that explanation. So there is no plausible exit poll error explanation that has been offered to date for the exit poll discrepancy, and the vote miscount hypothesis remains very credible. We've also been debating the exit poll discrepancy issues, and we've done some new algebraic analysis of exit poll discrepancies where we can now tell you what patterns of exit poll discrepancies result from vote shifts versus those exit poll patterns that will result from response bias, exit poll response bias. And our second paper that we've submitted into the record has some errors that were recently introduced from edits, so we need to give you a submission of that in a few days that's corrected, if that would be all right. I also work with some computer scientists on the Open Voting Consortium list to develop recommendations for legislators for specifying electronic voting system best practices guidelines. And they urge that electronic voting systems produce a paper ballot that will enable the voter to verify that his votes are correct before casting, and will permit a check on the machine accuracy to make a truly auditable recount possible. Errors will occur in any voting system, so we must design systems that can catch and recover from errors rather than trying to design perfect systems. The computer scientists also recommend mandatory randomly selected surprise hand recounts, and that no remote communications or networking of machines be allowed. But I might warn you that because these machines are allowed to be proprietary, this means two things. Number one, there are literally dozens of ways to rig elections with electronic machines without leaving any trace of evidence that any computer scientist could ever find on that machine afterwards. And number two, there are ways to hide wireless cards inside other cards in proprietary hardware so that even a computer expert could open the machine up, examine it, not see a wireless card, but yet have a wireless network card in the machine that would allow for vote embezzlement, cars to drive around from polling location to polling location changing votes. So that computer scientists recommend that voting systems be made open source and public, not proprietary or secret. How can we fix this problem? One important way is by routine paper audits to detect and correct vote miscounts of the paper ballots. It turns out that routine randomly selected independent audits of vote counts in just a small percentage of precincts has a surprisingly good chance of detecting miscounts. If we randomly select precincts at the moment polls close and immediately in the precinct count the paper ballots before they're removed from the precincts, we have a good chance of correcting any miscounts and locating them. For example, if you have 1,000 precincts in a county and you assume that you have 15% of the precincts that are being miscounted or have corruption, and you only do a 2% audit, your chance of catching at least one precinct with the miscounted votes is over 95% on just a 2% audit. If you do a, that's right. If you do a 5% audit, for just one other example, on 1,000 precincts that have only a 5% corruption rate, so you're assuming only 5% of the precincts are corrupted, you get over a 90% chance of catching a miscounted precinct with just a 5% audit rate. So that's highly recommended. Our second recommendation is that election offices can monitor, they can help independent analysts to monitor their elections for accuracy by releasing the data that is needed. So for example, they can release the precinct level data by vote type so that we know how many votes are counted in the early provisional, election day provisional, absentee, overseas, every vote type by precinct. Because if the election offices don't release the data at this level, the same thing can happen as happened in New Mexico, where you have phantom votes being padded for one candidate in one vote type, the absentee ballot type, and you have at the same time votes being subtracted maybe for another candidate in the other vote type, the election day electronic vote type. And when you add those together and report them as is normally done, they cancel each other out, and it looks like you have a normal election, even though you've shifted votes from one candidate and to another in two different vote types. So data lumped together often keeps major flaws of the election process secret, and insiders can easily be padding votes for one candidate, subtracting them for another. So with the detailed precinct level data broken out by vote type, we can get independent analysts can detect the irregular vote count patterns and catch them, before the candidates concede and before the wrong person is sworn into office. The good thing about this level of data is that every single state's Freedom of Information Act gives us the legal right to this data, and that if we raise the funds in order to hire the technical persons to implement the database for a nationwide collection of this data and analysts and releasing it publicly, and we alert the political candidates to the fact that they need to check the data before they concede, this is a very doable plan that we can use to prevent the wrong candidates from being sworn into office, no matter what happens with with our vote miscounts. So the National Election Data Archive will work to ensure that election data is collected and publicly released for transparent review and analysis by everyone. And the object of the National Election Data Archive is to ensure that if election fraud occurs favoring either party, that despite that, the correctly elected candidates are sworn into office. And do you have any questions or need further clarification?
I have a question. Yes, if you were, Ms. Dopp, if you were to institute this nationwide gathering of this data, how could it serve? Would it serve as an audit? Would it serve as a recount? Could you expand a little bit on how that process would work?
Actually, it would serve as a tool for analysis, mathematical analysis of the vote results, so that we could reliably warn candidates when it looked like there were irregular patterns of vote counts, that they needed to have recounts or investigations. And it would also enable statistical analysis to be developed that was court-worthy, so that if candidates needed court-worthy evidence that they could take to court to win challenges or investigations or recounts or even perhaps re-elections if there were no paper ballot, that they would be able to win in court because the level of the data would be sufficiently credible. Thank you.
Ms. Dopp, I think one of the concepts that you mentioned, releasing this data at a precinct level, is important. And as an observation, there's a statistical principle called Simpson's paradox. And Simpson's paradox says that if you combine data from small data sets into a larger whole, you may not be able to see the fundamental truths in that data. And so I think Dr. Phillips also alluded to the fact that we have to look at the data on a precinct by precinct basis because of the variations in the data that may not be discovered if it gets summarized and aggregated. Microphone, please.
And not just the precinct level, but also broken out by the type of vote.
Exactly, absolutely. Those are separate processes, and so they have to be examined individually.
Yes, and we also need from the election offices the vote counting method for each type of ballot in each precinct, and also the voter registration data and any demographic data. The more data we can collect the better analysis we can do. And in addition, I might suggest two other solutions that, that I would love to see someone implement, and that is it would be wonderful if someone could conduct public exit poll where the data would become public. And it's a very large project, but the data in the Edison-Matovsky exit poll, the precinct level data has never been released, so we don't know what precincts these are that are having these high discrepancies that should be investigated. And one other good idea is if someone could form some sort of a nonprofit to collect monies for recounts so that people could donate specifically for recounts, and these funds could be dispersed to candidates based on how irregular their election results look. And ideally, it should not be the candidates that have to pay for recounts. It should be the election offices or the counties themselves that should pay for the recounts, and they should be triggered automatically if the audit shows that there's a miscounted precinct countywide.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ms. Dopp, I wondered if I could ask you if you or those working with you have made any kind of efforts to forge relationship with the election process owners, the people who actually run the elections, and how responsive are they? I know we've heard in some cases they're very non-responsive. Have there been any kinds of efforts to try to encourage or to facilitate election process owners to improve their processes?
Well, we just devised a recent handout that we plan to send to state and county election officials. We have formed groups of volunteers in each state, well, not in every state, but we have groups of volunteers in many states that are attempting to obtain the data. In some states like Georgia and Ohio, they're being stymied. We do plan, as soon as we obtain funding, to hire a specific person that will be a liaison for all the state and county election offices. There are over 33,000 separate election offices in America, county and township, and unfortunately there's not one state that I'm aware of that yet collects the data at the state level, which means we have to go to each county to collect the detailed data we need currently. And so we will be contacting every state election official and encouraging them to collect the data for us.
I wonder if you could comment on I just have to say it's a very puzzling aspect of the circumstances we're in. Mm-hmm. First of all, have you approached them with factual data? I know that you're compiling it, but to speak with data to them ought to count. So that's one question. Have you done that? The second is what kind of... And number two is how do they respond?
We are not actually compiling the data yet. We spent 3 or 4 months since the election designing the database, which was a feat in itself because every state conducts their elections so differently and is organized so differently. So now we have the database designed, but we need to raise the funds to hire full-time programmers and technical staff. And we have had some of our volunteers in Pennsylvania, for example, contact the Secretary of State in Pennsylvania, or actually the governor, and then get back to me and say it's going to take 5 years. And I said, we don't have 5 years. We've got to get it done this year. So we just haven't tackled that issue enough yet.
I wonder if you may not actually be ready to address this, but I wonder if it wouldn't be worthwhile for somebody to pursue an investigation into what exactly is the obstacle. What exactly is the root cause of this resistance to numerical, quantitative data? And then proceeding from that, how do you address that?
Well, I have some idea of the root cause. If you actually look at the data that Matovsky released in May at the opinion poll research conference, you see that there is also vote miscounts that favor Kerry going on as well as favor Bush. So I think neither party is completely clean on the issue of perhaps embezzling votes. And so we are going to have to go after miscounts that favor both parties.
Question.
That very important related to Ms. Dopp and the machines, which I didn't go into. We have talked to people that are contractors and intimately familiar with the Secretary of State's system. There's one broke into central tabulators, transmission of real-time data. The other deals with registrations being scanned in. These reports now have both suggested that there may be back doors for certain federal agencies, including Selected Service, the IRS, and the Ohio State Troopers. And we also know that in Ohio voluntarily went into the matrix system. So I think we should question whether or not the databases should be accessed by outside federal and state agencies, and if they should be at all, and if so, under what conditions.
I have 2 points I need to make. The first one's quick. The reason why it is necessary to look at election results at the precinct level is because a normal distribution of vote patterns in one town may cancel out a fraudulent distribution in another town. For instance, in Butler County, there were towns where Bush received far fewer votes than the constitutional amendment prohibiting gay marriage that would cancel out the towns where he received more votes than the constitutional amendment if looked at the county level. The other thing, by a quick calculation, I have to disagree with some numbers that have been presented. It seems to me that if 15% of precincts in a county have fraudulent election results and 85% have absolutely correct ones reported on election night, that one must look at 4% of the precincts in order to have even a 50-50 chance of detecting the fraud. If 5% of the precincts are fraudulent, one must look at 13% of the precincts to have even a 50-50 chance of detecting the fraud. This goes to the point that no count but a hand count of paper ballots should ever be the official count. We need paper ballots in every precinct in this country, counted by hand, with human eyes, in public, at each precinct, and that should be the only count that ever stands, even if it takes all night to find out who won the election.
Okay. Eve has a question.
Yes, my question for you, Ms. Dopp, is this would be basically a nationwide data collection system, which is a very ambitious project. There has been a proposal for a constitutional amendment which would declare voting a right of every citizen, but it also would suggest that there should be some uniformity of election laws as between state to state. Would that be helpful in what you're proposing?
Well, my own personal opinion is that we have to be very wary when we go down the path of federalizing elections. We don't want to, I think part of our protection is, keeping our U.S. Constitution the way it is, with states, individual states controlling their own elections, and allowing that diversity to improve our elections. And also, I just would not want to see an administration, the presidential administration in charge of elections. I think that's, once you start federalizing elections, you might go down a path that you just don't want to go down.
I have a question for anybody basically on this panel, and that is, just for the record, could one or any of you speak as to what the chances are that these anomalies in the 2004 election occurred by random chance, please?
There's a asymmetrical nature to the anomalies. That is, the Democrats, when they were accused of engaging in election irregularity, it usually takes the direction of overzealous registration of voters, sort of kind of a retail adding. A lot of the things that happened in Ohio occurred to happen non-randomly. We got 80 sworn statements on vote hopping. It's 78 from Kerry to Bush, and only 2 saying it hopped in the other direction. And where the vote hopping occurred on the DRE machines, for example, are in Mahoning County and in Franklin County. And they also were on machines overwhelmingly within the inner city. Moreover, is that going into that election, is that they knew these machines were faulty in the past in Franklin County. In the 1998 election, these same machines had shifted 3% of the vote away from John Kasich to Ed Brown, and you can do it, it's right in a search of LexisNexis. The Columbus Dispatch reported discrepancies in both congressional elections in '98. Deborah Price lost votes, but particularly John Kasich. They were able to catch that because it was apparent that Ed Brown, with no money, did not win Kasich's home seat of Westerville by 80-20. This was a software ballot rotation problem. So the machines in Lucas County that are freezing up, and they froze up prior to the election, it was in the paper, you can read it in the Toledo Blade, they froze up disproportionately in the inner city wards. So I don't know whether it's non-random in the sense that the worst machines get to go to the inner city area and the more affluent areas get the better machines, or that in fact it was more deliberately orchestrated. The fact that you're switching, for example, precincts at the last second. The inner city has far more precincts than do the suburban and rural areas. So it will inevitably cause a disparate impact among poor and minority voters in the urban areas than if you live in Adams County and there's virtually only 10,000 people in the county. I mean, how many places are you going to shift it to?
Can I answer that question? Our group of PhD statisticians and mathematicians took a look at calculating the probability that the exit poll discrepancy would be as wide as it was in the 2004 presidential race. The calculation was first found to be 1 in 10 million. However, then the Edison-Matovsky group increased what they called the cluster factor and decreased the sample size by taking out some voters from the sample in the national exit poll, and they got that probability down to at best 1 in 1,200 calculated one way. But and another way that they still have out on a web page that they calculated the probability was 1 in 1 million. And one other thing I'd like to point out is that our election results are not showing just evidence of tampering in the presidential race. They're showing evidence of tampering in both the U.S. House and Senate races and in many governor's races as well. And they've been showing signs, statistical signs of highly improbable elections have been occurring with these electronic ballot voting machines since at least 1996.
A couple of points. So first of all, it appears that Kathy Dopp was speaking of a county where 50% of the precincts had fraudulent results, not 15. I believe I heard her incorrectly. Yeah, two things I want to say. If, as happened in Franklin County, 54 voting machines that were supposed to be delivered on election day, even by the discriminatory allocation system already decided upon by the Board of Elections, ended up not delivered. And all 54 of those precincts happened to be in the city of Columbus and none of them in the suburbs. And 60% of the precincts in the county are in the city of Columbus. Then the odds of that happening at random and not by design are 0.6 to the 54th power. And I urge anyone to get out their calculator and figure it out for themselves. I only used 4 analytical techniques: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. The other thing, I am also asked many times if I know of examples where Bush was hurt by problems with the electoral process, and I did find one. In Van Wert County in Ohio, a rural Republican county, one precinct had no voting machines. So they needed to borrow a voting machine from another precinct. And of course, the order in which the candidates' names appeared on the ballot was not the same. When I obtained by fax the election results from the Van Wert County Board of Elections, they twice faxed to me, unsolicited, a statement signed by 2 members of the Board of Elections stating the following. They asked J. Kenneth Blackwell what they should do about this, and he told them to submit a vote count of 0 for the entire precinct and that he would certify it.
I think your question was, in our opinion, could, with all of the anomalies and irregularities, could it have resulted from random error? I think I was in on this process of challenge from the beginning because Bob was very instrumental in getting it all started in Ohio. And the more I heard and the more I saw and the more that continues to come out at every juncture, including this one, the more I'm convinced, and I was initially anyway, that no way could it have been random. Could it have been just happenstance? Oh no, it was deliberate.
You know, we have cover letters to the Board of Elections from 2 counties where the Triad Company actually provided the election results. A vice president of the company, Brandon Sandlin, signed a letter saying basically, hello to all in Pike County, or hello to all in Madison County. Here are your election results. Now you can provide them to J. Kenneth Blackwell. I have a problem with that.
Okay, thank you. It is a little bit past time for break, and may I suggest that we take 10 minutes for break?
Larry.